Hello, YouTube. Today I'm going to share with you a comment and dissection of the first part of a video by Stefan Molyneux, where he talks about morality and morality as violence. And it's somewhat of a recurring theme or a recurring aspect of Stefan Molyneux. He sometimes makes these gigantic, broad, sweeping definitions. In UPB, his book or presentations about UPB, he has said that UPB is ethics or morality, maybe, right? So these two terms are conflated and used in the same way. And he says that UPB equals the scientific method. And it's just like UPB equals scientific method. In this video, he says morality or ethics or UPB for that matter equals violence. So I know that it might not be the case exactly that he means that everything that has to do with ethics or morality has to do with violence, but that there's always violence incorporated into ethics or morality in some way or another. But one point you might add to that is that in his book about ethics called UPB, there's no talk about violence, maybe indirectly, but it's not like it's always a part of when you apply this moral principle that you will inevitably end up in a situation where you have to use some sort of violence or whatever, right? And this is a big problem because it's like he's just sort of moving the philosophical goalpost. Now it's violence, and then now it's the scientific method, and now it's objectivity, and now it's whatever, right? It's like he's sort of just throwing things out, and nobody dares to criticize what he says in any way. And that's why I am, every time he starts to talk about morality, I have sort of an interest in taking it down, right? Because his ethics, called UPB or Universally Preferable Behavior, the book about his ethics, is so unbelievably badly argued that it's sort of almost like an insult to philosophy, right? And you can watch my sort of many-part series about UPB called Deconstructing UPB on my website, and there's a playlist also you can go and start up, and also some additional related Stefan Molyneux ethics or morality videos connected to that playlist. So you will possibly get everything in connection with my deconstruction of Stefan Molyneux's ethics. And that's why it's all the more important to me to point out that it's hard to, if Stefan Molyneux didn't claim that he has practically found the holy grail of philosophy, which is describing, in my opinion, a moral principle. He doesn't do that, but at least he claims to have found a sort of a framework of ethics by which you can judge a moral principle or moral statement or something along those lines, right? And because it's so badly argued and invalid, and you can watch the whole series, right? It has to be pointed out that you shouldn't go along with what he's saying. It's not that he's necessarily, it's not a personal vendetta or something like that. I am very much into figuring out a perfect moral principle, or a perfect principle, as I would call it, right? And this is what is, in my opinion, needed in the world, is a perfect moral principle. That's what is needed, right? And one of the things that I will point out in this video is exactly why it's needed. And because it's needed, we have all sorts of problems, not least philosophers like Stefan Molyneux saying that morality is violence, which is a very, very dangerous path to tread. It's almost like a false flag, right? In my opinion, it's like out of desperation. Now I'm sort of pocket philosophizing, the pocket psychologizing. His frustration that his ethics is possibly not working, right? I would say it's absolutely certain. Well, certainty is a difficult subject, but I am convinced that this is not even ethics what he has done. So he cannot claim to have done any kind of morality or have found a moral principle, right? It's so dangerous when people make these broad sort of ethics equals this, right? Morality is the same as this, right? Those are so broad and undetailed descriptions that they need to be challenged. I mean, it must be challenged, right? And it seems to be nobody out there, except a few people here and there, right? Like rationality rules, who have you might know that about a year ago they had a debate about UBB, and Stefan Molyneux jumped like like a sophist, dodging all the bullets or all the arguments or attempts at discussing anything in his book. Most particular his core syllogism, right, which is also a piece of garbage, right? So rationality rules did right in trying to challenge this because it's such a core thing and it's so badly argued. But this is just about the only one I can remember in recent history challenging Stefan Molyneux. What are they afraid of? He can't do you anything, right? He can, at most, he can make a new video by himself and say, this guy is a troll and that guy is a troll, and to sort of herd his acolytes and his followers into submission, right? To make sure that his sort of business model keeps going. And but the basics to me is that the philosophy is so bad, right, that it has to be challenged. It has to be pointed out that you can't trust this. It's bullshit, right? So I'm going to the first part of this video, which is a long, I think it's 1.5 or 2 hours long. Is in the first part, or the first few minutes, he's talking about morality as violence, or at least relation to violence. And I'm going to first play it and maybe comment on it, and then I will add a sort of a PowerPoint presentation where I can point out the fallacies in his arguments. It might be a bit complicated. First of all, I need to switch, and excuse me for that, but I have to switch from this shared window to another shared window, which is my PowerPoint, or actually my Adobe PDF viewer, and that might be a little annoying. And secondly, I haven't rehearsed it, and it's sort of could be a slightly complicated matter. It's not very complicated, but I might not be, it may not be the sharpest presentation ever, right? So just keep that in mind, please. Okay, let's go. Let's see what he says.
Let's get straight on to the belly of the beast, shall we? I want to talk to you about morality. So, why are various isms so violent? Why?
An ism can be violent, right? And now I'm picking his words, right? An ism is a word. It's a term. It's a terminology or something like it can't be violent, right? Only individuals can be violent. If you're talking morality, we are talking about human individuals in some way or another, right? We're not talking about dogs or, rainworms or something like that. We are talking about human beings. And it's just, there are a few things here and there that I feel that needs to be very clear what you're talking about. It has to be very clear. You can't, fiddle around with the words, right? You have to understand what is going on. That an ism is a word or a terminology, an understanding you can have in your head, and that understanding can't be violent. It may be that individuals believing in that ism are violent, right? But then again, we have to define what violence is. What is violence compared to an action, right? Is this violent when I lift this canteen? What was it called? Bottle up and down, or do this to my chin? What's the definition of violence? I am making an action, right? If I drop this on my foot, would that be violence? If I dropped it on another person's foot, would that be violence? Where is the delineations of these terms, right? These delineations, as soon as we start to talk about morality, your ears have to be sharp and listen for when morality is being sneaked in through the back door, right? By using certain terms that are already loaded with some sort of moral connotation, right? And this is what Stefan Molyneux does all the time. He just chooses words that have a moral connotation and says, therefore, I have proved morality or ethics, or, because I think that is a theft, therefore it's immoral. But it's the term theft that has the connotation of immorality. You haven't pointed out what it is in reality that makes that a theft, right? Or makes that immoral or something like that, right? And the same is the case with violence. Violence is an action that is immoral, right? So what makes it immoral, right? It's this jumping of the Hume's thought gap. So, okay.
Is it fascism, communism, socialism, why are they so violent? And why does violence tend to escalate and increase in the world as ideology takes over? And I'll tell you why. Bitcoin is going up again. Steph was right. Yeah, generally. There are worse bets in the world than assuming I'm correct. So, yeah, now apparently it's okay to look into the China virus coming out of the Wuhan lab. Apparently that's a thing again. I did the case against China, well over 13, 14 months ago. So what's going on? So morality, it's what I really want to get across at this point very, very clearly to you is really, really important. Morality is violence.
There's this sweeping definition, right? Morality equals violence, right? But I just pointed out violence is a certain categorization of an action of some kind, right? So it's an action that has immorality to it. So if immorality is something a label you put on that action, how can that complete thing be morality when morality is that which points out whether or not it's immoral or not, whether or not it's an action or it's violence? So already there, the terms and the rigidity of what he's saying is out in the woods, right? But because he's certain sort of charismatic personality, and he can use words left and right, and it sounds like he's saying something that is right, coherent, and very wise and so on. Right? Oh, this is wise. Oh, let me listen to that. Oh, this sounds right. Yes, and it goes along with my political convictions already. That socialism and fascism, yeah, sure, people believing in that stuff are crazy, right? But that doesn't prove your your statement, right, doesn't prove that morality equals violence when violence is immoral actions, right? It's like x equals x plus 1, right? And the only way you can get that to do is saying x is 0, but then you haven't done anything when if 0 is your morality, right?
Morality is violence. And what I mean by that, not that all violence is moral, but all morality justifies the use of force. All morality justifies the use of force. If you're a woman and you have the moral right to not be raped, very good, then of course you are perfectly legitimate in using force to prevent from being raped. If you have the moral right to not be assaulted, then you have the right to use force to prevent yourself from being assaulted. If you have the right to not be murdered, to not be stolen from, you have the right to use force to prevent that. So whatever we define as the moral is what we give permission to use violence in the pursuit of or defense of that principle. Morality is violence. And again, that's not to say that the two are completely synonymous, because you could have just self-defense, which is the use of violence to defend your moral rights, and that's perfectly fine. But.
Then again, there's an exception, right? Again, there's these exceptions. And this is one of these things that previously Stefan Molyneux was very much aware of, that making broad sweep statements, so you should do this or you shouldn't do that, right? And then, creating small exceptions, like, okay, if it's self-defense, well, okay, if there's an exception to your definition, it's you are violating your own definition rather than pointing out what is going on in reality, right? You are saying you can manipulate the definition according to what is going on in reality. So now you're sort of halfway manipulating Hume's ill-thought gap by saying it's an interpretation of what is going on, right? At some point, this is a self-defense, which is okay and not immoral, while doing it that way in another situation, which is sort of a subjective interpretation. Then it's all of a sudden immoral because now it's violence. So how the hell do you know, right? You don't know. You're not defining what is going on. You're just throwing around words as you see fit, right? So when there are these kinds of exceptions that has to be based on some sort of subjective judgment, it is always an appeal to an authority, right? Because somebody will say, you're not allowed to make that judgment. That's a subjective judgment. It has to be an authoritative, third-party, objective, outside, independent judgment of what is going on, right? And then you have the state, and then you have, the churches, and you have everything, all kinds of authority in the world, right? It has to be specific. It has to be grounded in what is going on, right? You can't just throw around words there. Okay, then there's an exception over here, and then we will call it self-defense, and then it's okay, right? What's going on in the real world? You're so normally so focused on objective reality and science and all that. Point out, how do you empirically figure out whether or not something is violence or it's self-defense, right? Please do that, right? Please, Mr. Objectivity, Mr. Empiricism, please tell me how I experience and differentiate between self-defense and violence. And it has to be empirical, right? You can't say that, well, if the person thinks this, or the person has that feeling, or sense this. No. I have to be able to experience it empirically, right? Otherwise, it's completely subjective. And you have also pointed out that something that is completely subjective isn't even philosophy, right? Which I would ferociously disagree with, but that's another thing.
When people talk about morality, they're talking about justified violence.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. That what people do is they want to have some kind of way to bridge Hume's is-ought gap by saying, aha, I have experienced something that means that you have broken into the area of immorality. You are now in the area of immorality, and this is where it's okay for me to be violent against you as a self-defense mechanism, right? And what people do is say, you have become immoral, and I can be violent against you. It's actually not violence, it's just a justified action, right? And that's what the state and religion and everything else do. They make laws or, commandments and then those who make the commandments are those who judge whether or not you have violated those commands or laws, right? And then they say, okay, you are the one who initiated the immorality. I can oppose you with my violence, right? But the point is, there is no morality attached to that commandment or that law, because nobody has ever found a perfect moral principle. So it's all about gut feeling, right? It's all about what can I get out of making these laws or making these commandments? And it has become something that controls people rather than making sure that people who want to take advantage of you, right? The smart people have said, aha, I can use that bridge between morality and immorality to say, you're immoral, so I'm justified in being violent against you, right? And that violence is inherent in the system so that it will, those people who want to take advantage of other people position themselves on the other side of that violence so they will get those resources that they inevitably, it's always about resources, right? They will get their clammy hands on, right? So if that's what you're talking about, I will agree.
So, what is the morality that reduces the amount of violence in the world?
No, you just said morality is violence. So how can, if morality is violence, how can it reduce violence? I mean, it may be that something in there you want to say, but you are sort of, the words that you left and right, it's completely impossible to get something coherent out of what you're saying, because you are throwing around the definitions as, left and right, it's incoherent, right?
What is the morality that reduces the amount of violence in the world? Well, clearly it has to be reactionary morality, and it has to be case-limited morality.
Reactionary morality. Reactionary is when you want to go back to something previous. So if you are saying, okay, if this situation has become immoral for some way, so for some reason that we haven't figured out yet how to identify, but let's say we have, and then we are in the immoral area, how do we push that back to become moral again, right? So how do we push that back? If that's what you're saying, I would to some degree, agree with you. To some degree, agree with you. And what was the other thing? Just 1 second, I have to switch back a little here.
But when people talk about morality, they're talking about justified violence. So, what is the morality that reduces the amount of violence in the world? What is the morality that reduces the amount of violence in the world? Well, clearly it has to be reactionary morality, and it has to be case-limited morality. So if you were to say it's immoral for it to be raining, well, I guess.
But you can't just, you can't listen to philosophers saying it's immoral for for rain to appear, right? It's stupid. It's an annoying way of arguing, right? That's not how you do philosophy. I know that this is supposed to be, and the excuse is that it's supposed to be to, ordinary people, and it has to be, the level of the academic level has to be low or something like that. But come on, and this is important, right? It has to be more rigid than this.
If you shoot the clouds or something like that. Let's start with a very sort of limited specific example. So the non-aggression principle is reactive. It's not.
But why are you just pulling in something, a principle that you haven't proven, right? You didn't make the non-aggression principle as far as I'm concerned, right? How do you know it's okay? Can you just make up any principle? Because why are we using your principle? What if I want to use my principle and say, it might be all good and fine that you have this principle, but I have another principle over here, right? I have written my own book. I have my own system. I have figured out that this principle is okay, right? Why would I want to use your principle?
Not proactive, it's reactive. It's the non-aggression principle. Thou shalt not initiate the use of force against others.
But somebody will figure out a way to say, but I didn't initiate. I was violent, but I didn't initiate the violence. Somebody else did something. That's what the state does all the time. It says, you didn't pay your taxes. It says in the law, right? So we are violent against you, right? But they're initiating the violence. I didn't ask to pay something here, over there, or whatever. But that's how it is being violated. This kind of principle. It can't work. It doesn't work, right? It has to be better than that, right? It can't be based on somebody making a subjective judgment on whether or not something is violence, as I pointed out earlier in this critique, right?
But if force is initiated against you, then you have the right to use force to defend your persons.
I have a right. Where's that right? Where is it? Is it written in the sky somewhere? Is it was it handed down to Moses, or whatever? What's a right? Well, all of a sudden there's a right somewhere. No, there isn't. A right is an idea, right? It's an idea. It doesn't exist. Just because you have an idea doesn't mean that everybody has an idea and that idea exists, or you have a right or anything, right? It doesn't exist.
Property and so on. And you can do this ex parte or third party as well. Use somebody else, right? It's a universal principle.
So you can ask a third party to intervene also, right? Now it gets more and more complicated. So a third party who's not involved in the situation, right, doesn't know that you just slapped me on the face and then I punch you in the stomach. And if he turns around to see me punching you in the stomach, he will say that I initiated the conflict, or whatever you want to call it. Well, I know that you just punched in my face. So I know I'm just retaliating, right? So that's bystander didn't have the full picture of what is going on. So now he is intervening, going against what is the actual situation. So it's bullshit.
So once we understand that morality is that which is used to justify violence, then we have to be very sparing, tiny, case-controlled, and tight in our justifications for morality. Because whenever we justify morality, whatever we apply morality to, there do we also justify violence.
So are you saying that if you are applying a moral principle and you say, okay, the moral principle applies in this situation, now I am my violence, or my intended violence is justified because I've applied this principle, right? Or whatever principle, I don't know, whatever it is, that morality you're talking about. So what I get from this is that what all that Stefan Molyneux is talking about here is what is going on after a moral principle has been violated, right? If you go around in your everyday and adhere to a perfect moral principle, you are staying on the moral side of things, right? As soon as something is happening that is on the other side, the immoral side, then all the moral principle has done is pointing out, now you are, or the other person or whatever in this interaction is on the wrong side of the fence, right? That's all that the person has done, right? But you're saying, okay, now I'm going over on that other side of the fence, and now I am justified in using violence over on that side of the fence. Well, you're going over on the immoral side, as if you can jump that gap without having a moral principle. Now, I know you're referring to the non-aggression principle, but I don't accept that, right? I don't accept that. Because, first of all, your UPP is garbage, right? And secondly, I have never seen a rigid proof of the non-aggression principle. I'm not saying it's a bad principle as such, but it's not a perfect principle, right? That's why it needs to be perfect. It needs to be perfect, right? And because it's not perfect, it has never been used, right? It's not an argument for it being imperfect that it hasn't been used, right? You know, people will not necessarily use a perfect moral principle if it was there, right? How would you identify? That's another question, right? Deeper question, but this is a dangerous path you're going down now.
And if we want to keep violence down in the world, we have to keep morality reactive, case-specific, very, very, very tightly defined.
Tightly defined and case-specific and confined. It sounds like you're saying something, but what are you saying? A principle is a description, or it's a kind of philosophy, right? It's ethics that results in a principle that is describing some kind of adjustment of behavior or something along those lines, right? How do you make that confined and all these? It sounds like you're saying something, but you aren't really saying anything, right? Except that you're standing on the immoral side of things and think you can now, activate violence.
So if we say morality is the non-aggression principle that bans rape, theft, assault.
Yeah, if we say that, but I'm not saying that. I won't say that because I don't believe in that. Right? And I think you can't do that either because your ethics is garbage, right? And I'm sorry to be so frank about describing it and it sound insulting and trolly and so, but it's really bad. It's unbelievably bad, right? So please check out my deconstruction to get a feel for how bad it is, right?
Assault and murder. We have a very powerful and very limited justification for very tightly defined. So if we say morality is the non-aggression principle that bans rape, theft.
Morality is a non-aggression principle. Yeah, if we say that, okay, let's say that. Let's pretend.
Assault and murder. We have a very powerful and very limited justification for violence, and it's reactive. Let's look at another example of something that is often considered a moral right or a moral rule. Let's say that you say it's immoral to pay women less than men for work.
But why would I say that? That's not a principle, right? It's not a principle. You can't throw these weird statements into the soup and say, that's morality. Why is it immoral, right? That's the question a philosopher should handle, not somebody says this is immoral, and then we'll take it from there. No, you have to step back and be philosophical about it and do ethics and say, well, I have conjured up this moral principle, which stems from this philosophy called ethics. And this is the moral principle. So if you're saying that's immoral, let's check it with my moral principle, right? That's how it should be done. You can't just, somebody says that rain is immoral or something like that. Bullshit, man. We can't work from that.
Work of equal value or equal standing. It's immoral.
The reason people say that is that they want so desperately to jump the is-ought gap, right? So they can use violence against other people. That's correct. That's what people do, or that's what's inherent in this violent system, is that those who are in command demand to say these people are immoral because they are this way and they are that way. So I'm justified because they are immoral, and because they are immoral, I'm justified in using violence against them. For some reason, people seem to accept this kind of weird argument, right? Or this weird chain of sort of a moral argument. It's not even an argument. It's sort of it's almost like it's an intuition or something like that, right? That if people are immoral, it's okay to beat them, right? Into submission. It's a weird monkey-like behavior.
To pay women less than men. Okay, so if you say that, what have you now justified? You have now justified the use of force.
You might not have justified it, but the problem is with democracy, if a majority of people think it's fine to use violence against people that somebody has said are immoral, even if it's just by sort of indication or is implicitly, people accept this kind of violence, right? But maybe it's more complicated than this, because the whole system is based on violence and fear, right? So whenever somebody says the bad guys are over there, it's not you, but they're over there, they say, okay, fine, it's not me. I'm getting off the hook, right? So yeah, it doesn't matter these guys or girls over there, they are going to be punished. It's not me. So it's like, okay, as long as it's not me, I'm closing my eyes and looking the other way, right?
In raising women's wages, you've now justified the use of force.
Why should we not lower men's wages, right? Why not? It would be more fair to lower men's wages if they get too much, because if men are overpaid, they should be reduced in their pay, right? The argument is that there's a difference, right? They have to argue that men are being paid the right wages and women are being underpaid. But how do you know that? How do you know that's the case? Why is it not women that has the right wage and men are being overpaid, right? So just lower men's wages. Oh, no, because that's not the agenda. The agenda is that women want to get more payment than they might deserve by saying men are getting, there's a patriarchy that wants to hold women down and pay men more because we are a big club of men trying to hold women out of the workforce or whatever. I think you should lower men's wages to the level of women. Then that would be equality, right?
Force, you say, oh, well, no, but I think it's moral, but I don't want force involved. Then it's not morality. Then it's aesthetics or politeness or social convention or something. It's not morality. Morality is that which takes the safety off the revolver and lets you point it at someone. That's what...
Actually, it doesn't. Morality doesn't do that. Morality is a moral principle that is used to identify when you are stepping over the line and are in the land of immorality, right? It's the borderline that is the principle points out in perpetuity whether or not you're on the right side of the line. But at the same time, the moral principle is defined so that you can't find it somewhere. You can't go and look for morality and say, there it is, so the line must be here. In my opinion, morality has to be defined somehow. It has to be defined. You can't deduce it logically or syllogistically or, by looking at the world or anything. It has to be a definition from a specific purpose, right? And the way it has to be implemented is that people understand that it works according to an idea of what morality is about, right? Is some sort of fairness within interactions between people. So if you can argue that way and define it that way, they say this is the moral principle, and people will eventually adhere to it, and then hopefully in some time in the future, a majority will adhere to that moral principle and everything will be fine, or at least as fine as it can be.
Morality is foundationally takes the safety off, lets you point your gun at someone. Someone's coming to rape you.
I don't believe that. No. That's a misconception about morality. I know that people want to argue that way, right? That's what the state does all the time. But it doesn't mean that it's correct. Just because somebody's murdering somebody over there doesn't mean that I have a right to murder somebody, right? Just because somebody's stealing something over there doesn't mean that I have a right to steal something over there, right? Over here. Somebody is wanting to use violence over there doesn't mean I have a right to use violence over here, right? So it's a bad form of arguing. You are when it comes to violence, right? It's like, yeah, we go about my day and I can shoot that guy, right? It's like, okay, calm down, right? Calm down. This is not the way you do it, right? It's not like, okay, the trigger, now I'm on and I can shoot somebody, right? That's not morality, please, right? Just because somebody has a weird understanding of what they are entailed or able to do with regards to immorality or whatever, doesn't mean that that's what it is, right? That's not morality. Morality is not about shooting anybody or being violent or whatever, right?
Take a seat.
Actually, morality is about making some sort of adjustment so there's either no violence or you can avoid that violence, right? You can avoid it. So if somebody wants to be violent, but everybody avoids that person, there's no violence, right?
Safety off, point your gun at them, and shoot them if they continue, right?
I want you to point out, I really, really, really want to ask you to be very careful with this, right? Be very, very careful about certain kinds of actions or violence or, whatever in regards to morality, right? Please be very, very careful with this, right? It's like almost like you're handing out guns to people and say, go shoot these, go. It's so ridiculous, right? I've sensed a kind of desperation here, right? It's a kind of desperation that morality doesn't work. The Christians are stupid, right? They're sitting there thinking they can save the world, and all that Christians has made sure is that there could be, fascistic or communistic or socialistic structures in their society, right? And they're sitting there waiting to die so they can get their benefits when they're dead. It's stupid, man, right? It doesn't work. And philosophy hasn't come up with a moral principle in 3,000 years. And neither has Stefan Molyneux, and Stefan Molyneux understands this. And that's why he's kind of desperate now, right? He has to talk about, this is, we are closing in on the time when the guns have to come out of the holster, right? And this is freaking dangerous, right? And I want to point out, it's because you claim to be a philosopher, or it's fine. I have no problem people calling themselves philosophers. Fine. I call myself a philosopher. Even I have no training. And I'm actually glad that I do not have training. Otherwise, I would be a lousy philosopher, right? But you are claimed to found the holy grail of philosophy, right? Morality, ethics, and so on. So I need to make sure that you understand the problems within your philosophy, or at least the way I see them. And when you are sort of carrying wood to the fire, right? You're sort of, okay, if I can't argue with people, I can say, well, pull out your gun, right? It's very close, at least in my opinion, right? I don't like talk about ethics being imbued with talk about weapons and shooting and violence, right? I don't like that, right? That's not the kind of ethics I'm going to do, right? So that's why I'm reacting very strongly to this.
Say it's immoral, it's evil, it's wrong to pay women less than men. What happens? Well, you run to the government.
Well, are there women who are paid more than men, right? I have met a lot of women who are being paid more than I am, right? So why should I get more than me? They have a different kind of job. So what? In my opinion, if you're a socialist, right? Let's just get this straight. If you're a fucking socialist and you want equality, every single individual on earth must be equal. Everybody must make the same amount of money. Everybody has to have the same amount of children. Everybody has to have the same car, the same bicycle, the same kind of house with the same number of rooms and the same amount of food and so on. There has to be equality. And if that is not what people are going for when they talk about equality, then fuck equality, right? Take your fucking equality and stick it where the sun don't shine, right? I'm so tired of that equality bullshit, right? If there's equality, everybody in the world is equal. Maybe except children, but they are taken care of by the parents, hopefully, right? Everybody in the world must be equal and have the exact same thing, right? Everybody. And if that can't be done, then fuck your equality, right? I'm not talking to you, Stefan Molyneux, in this regard, but to everybody else talking about equality. Fuck you.
And you say there's this injustice going on, there's this inequality, this exploitation, this sexism going on. So the government says, oh, okay, well, that's wrong. And what do we got to do? We got to ban. We've got to ban women being paid less.
Yeah, that's why they think that they are so wise that they can make this is-ought gap. They can point out where the bridge to this gap is, right? They're saying we're writing a law, right? That's where the gap is, and that's where the delineation between morality and immorality is, right? So they are just sitting there like some fucking God descending from the skies, telling people where that line is that nobody has been able to philosophize in 3,000 years, right? It's ridiculous.
Than men for work of equal value, whatever that is defined as. So you get, and this was back in the early 1960s, equal pay for work of equal value. The equal pay legislation went through in America. A lot of other Western countries in the 60s were said it's now illegal to pay a woman less than a man. Now,
I think it should be said that it's illegal to pay men more than women. Right? Why is it women less than men? Why is that men are being paid more than women? How do you know what value you have? If you know if it's about values, you have to adjust the individual productivity, right? That's how the market works. So all this equality of outcome is bullshit. They choose it so it will lead to the benefit they want, right? Okay, it's not a critique of you, Stefan Molyneux. It's a critique of these bullshit arguments.
There's an example of something that is defined as immoral, and therefore the safety is off, guns are pointed at people, and if you're found to be paying women less than men, they can sue you and you won't get government contracts, and if you lose the lawsuit, you have to pay, and if you don't pay, they'll take the money from you by force, and right? It's the domino. You flick that little domino called this is now immoral, and the big last domino is the safety coming off, guns, and guns being pointed at people. If you say racism is immoral, if you say hate speech is immoral, then you are saying to people,
what people are just trying to label people as immoral so they can get their stuff, right? It is the old story that these guys are bad, take their stuff, right? That's all it is. It's the same story. It's the same freaking story everywhere, right? Take their stuff, or kill them so we can take their land, or whatever it is, right? And they have something we should have because we're moral, and then we will kill them. It's sort of the same old story, right? Find an excuse to label them as, quote, bad, and then kill them and take their stuff, right?
You can take the safety off, and you can use weapons, and you can use force to keep things moral. Murder is immoral. You could use force to defend yourself from being murdered. Racism, sexism, various phobias, you name it. The moment you define these things as immoral, now you can define them as impolite, you can...
Yeah, but you can't just go around calling things immoral. It has to be in reference to something, right? You can't just, pull it out of your ass. That's what Hume pointed out. People are just, throwing oughts and ought nots around as they, saying that's immoral, and this immoral, and that's immoral, and this is moral, and whatever. Just pulling it out of their ass. They have to compare it to something. And that something must be a moral principle, right? Or some other, that's what I call it. I call it a moral principle, right? Because that's what people have called it through the ages.
Define them as gauche, as coarse, as unrefined, as socially unacceptable. These are not moral judgments. Like that.
No, but what I'm trying to point out is that you are actually about to step over the line of morality. Even if you don't know where it is, you have a sense that these people are just pulling their morality out of their ass, and they're willing to shoot somebody who doesn't comply. And you're willing to go over there and say, okay, I'm going to fight you, right? What I think you should do is try to avoid them instead, right? Try to avoid them until they get so close that they are threatening your life and your livelihood, right? Then you might defend yourself, but you might be killed, right? But it's not about picking the fight, which is sort of what I feel between the lines here, right? You're still seeming to be on the right side, but you're looking over the fence and say, I want to jump in and defend morality, right? That's not good, right? That's what I'm afraid. That's what I'm some sort of triggered about, right?
That's evil. The moment you say evil, safety comes off the...
Why it doesn't? But then people, that's what the problem, that's what the idiots do. They say evil and gun, right? Evil, gun. That's what they say. That's not what you say. You're a philosopher, for Christ's sake. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't talk about violence and ethics, right? Don't do that, please, right? You are rebel rousing. It's very close, right? Don't do that, please.
Revolver, right? And yes, there are revolvers for safety, right? So if you want to know why something like communism is so violent, and I'm going to say it's not just violence by tendency. I'm not just going to say that it's violent by historical example. I'm not just going to say it's violent because power corrupts. I want to prove to you that something like communism is violent by definition, that it can't ever be anything else. Because, we've got to pinch off that escape avenue of real communism has never been tried, which you never hear about National Socialism, but that's, of course, for reasons that are pretty obvious.
I'm fast forwarding a bit here.
People appropriate clothing, that kind of stuff, where it's nice to have, but you can't shoot someone for being late. And the reason you can't shoot someone for being late is they're not forcing you to be in that position.
You can't shoot someone for being late. I mean, this makes me crazy, right? This makes me furious. You can't shoot somebody for being late. This is madness, right? You are actually talking about, you're judging whether or not you can shoot somebody for being late. I mean, it's madness. Stop that. Come on. Think. Philosophy is about thinking. It's not about shooting, right? It's about thinking.
position. Somebody who's got a gun to your head who's going to shoot you is forcing you into that position so you can use force to...
When somebody's pointing a gun to your head, you are on the wrong side of the fence, right? If you have not, you just, out of the blue, gun to your head, it's on the wrong side of the fence, right? Now, how did you get over on that side of the fence, right? How did you get there? That's the point. It's kind of also your problem that there's a guy with a gun, right? How did that happen? How did you get in that situation? Shit can happen out of the blue. I know that. But that's the long line of immoral situations that has ended up in you standing in that impossible, weird, immoral situation. It's not necessarily your fault or anything like that, but stay focused on where you have to be when you're dealing with morality. When somebody is pointing a gun to your head, it's too late for morality, right? Morality is about avoiding getting into a situation where somebody has a gun to your head, right? It's too late. It's no longer about morality, right? It's something else. We could discuss what that could be, but it's certainly not morality. Morality tries to put you in a situation or behave in a way that makes you avoid ending up in that situation, right? It's almost like trying to discuss how to ride a car by studying cars that go off-road, right? Or ends up in the ditch, or drives out into the field or into the woods for some strange reason, right? And saying, okay, I have to study that particular, car that went into the ditch over there to figure out how to drive a car correctly. That's not how you do it, right? You find a principle of how to drive a car that makes sure that you do not end up in the ditch, right? That's what I'm trying to say.
To push back. And then there's morally neutral actions, taking a dump, running for the...
Another point is along these lines is that whatever has happened, a long series of immorality action, immoral actions and immoral situations of people acting immorally with regard to a certain perfect moral principle is not the situations that we for 3,000 years haven't had a moral principle that works. And we have ended up in a situation that certainly does not reflect the application of a moral principle. So we can't use a moral principle to work against this already immoral situation, right? That's not what the principle should do. The principle is such that if it had been applied 3,000 years ago and perpetually until now, all these situations wouldn't be there. But you can't, have a period of 3,000 years where a moral principle haven't been applied and say, in this weird situation, the moral principle should also take care of all these weird situations that has arrived because of no moral principle, right? So if that's the approach, we will not find the perfect moral principle, because that principle will be something that works against something that is already immoral, right? So
us that don't have any, don't have any moral quality or characteristic, they can't be universal.
Yeah, to reflect on what I said just now, that if what you're trying to find is a principle of driving a car that will also make all the cars that are in the ditch all of a sudden drive along the road, right? It can't do that. A moral principle can only say, okay, this is how you drive your car. And okay, there was these cars that were turned over halfway on the street or in the ditch or whatever. Too bad they didn't follow moral principle. That's not the fault of the moral principle that is applied from this point on and forward, right? This should make sure that people don't end up in the ditch. So what happened until the moral principle is applied has no effect on whether or not it doesn't have to solve the previous problems. It only has to solve the problems from the start of the application and forward, right?
You can universalize everyone being on time. You can universalize everybody not raping, stealing, assaulting, and murdering, and so on. But you can't normalize. So things which you can't normalize are not can't universalize. Sorry, are not part of any moral continuum. Things which you can universalize but are not imposed upon you, I call aesthetically preferable actions. It's nicer if you do it, but you can't shoot people for not doing it. And then there's universally preferable behavior, which is
this violence and morality. This is the core of what I'm trying to work with here, and I think I will maybe we'll take a little more here, but I think it's sort of fading into some other things he has to say. So it's sort of just an interesting start approach, and then he's going to talk about all sorts of other stuff. So let's see how much more morality we will get from him this time.
That you can use force to defend yourself for violations of, right?
So now you can use the term force, right? Okay, force is neutral in some, at least to me, right? So now it's no longer violence. Now it's force. What's the difference? We need to be clear about these definitions. We need to be clear about these terms. And specifically because we're dealing with morality, then are these terms already imbued with morality? Then you can't bring them in. Then you would be violating Hume's sword gap, right?
So I want to prove to you how and why, forget all historical examples, forget communism causes power to accrue in the hands of a few people and power corrupts, which is kind of like a loosey-goosey, foggy domino argument. You know, it's like the slippery slope argument. What I want to do is I want to show you, prove to you, establish beyond the shadow of a doubt the communism will always lead to infinite violence. And the reason is this.
Well, it doesn't lead to violence. It is violence. It's, as you pointed out, people saying, okay, I need some stuff, right? I will find somebody who's bad. I will label why they're bad. And then I will control them and, shoot them if they don't give in their stuff. That's what isms is. That's what they are there for. They're for labeling other individuals as bad and take their stuff, right? That's all it is.
Communism says that economic and political inequality is evil. People who make more.
Yeah, that's the excuse. That's the line. That's to say, okay, it's evil. This is evil, and they are on the evil side. Take their stuff, right? That's what they do. Okay, let's see.
More people who make less. People who have effective people in a meritocracy. The square root produces half the value.
I think we will stop there. I don't think there's more around. He's going to prove that it always leads to violence. I would say that all these isms is a justification for arbitrary violence. The point you might want to the thing one might want to point out is that these isms it's always those who regulate the political correctness or whatever you want to, who states what it's all about, this ism, who points out who are the bad guys and who are the good guys, right? They don't have philosophers applied, or if they have, they are sort of bought and paid for, right? To go the errands of these ism controllers. Those who control the ism are those who says these people are moral and these are immoral, right? That's how you identify it, is by those who control the ism are those who point out who are the bad guys and who are the good guys. And the bad guys are those we are going to steal from, right? And if they don't want to be stolen from, we will shoot them, right? That's what isms are there for. How you know it's an ism is that those who control the ism are those who point out where the bad guys are, right?
Sorry. What is it for 1,033.333? Anyway, so that's a fact. Got it.
Okay, well, I think we will stop there. And To further clarify the ideas and concept of philosophy that is touched upon in this 10-12 minutes of ethics or morality by Stefan Molyneux, I will not go further in this section or this part. I will make a part 2 where I go into in depth explaining further what I'm talking about here, because it needs to be clarified in a more strict and coherent manner than just by using words. So I have a presentation I would use, and I hope that you will join me there. And until then, have a nice day.